Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 120. And I thought I would update some of my old students if they're still listening out there. So this is not a sermon episode. And I thought I'd run through a bunch of topics that, the way that I used to, in a much more abbreviated fashion. The last non-sermon episode I made was back in September of 2023, and that was episode 78. Ideas have no color. But since then, I've been teaching middle school, sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, and yeah, it was a big change. Originally, when I started teaching, I talked to them like they were college students. They were looking at me like I was crazy. Um, then I tried to talk to them like they were my own kids, and they were clearly not at that level. So it was a struggle trying to find where they actually were mentally in their maturity. And it didn't help that the eighth graders, it was a middle school that was part of an elementary school. And so the eighth grade was the last year that the school, like the highest grade that the school taught. And some of them had been there since kindergarten or preschool. And so they were pretty much sick and tired of the school. They were done. They were had senioritis, except they were only eighth graders. And so there was a lot of weird things going on. But anyway, eventually I was able to get through to them and was able to teach them a little bit of something. I had an arbitration date for my unjust non-renewal of my teaching contract after teaching at Temple for like 20 years. The first class I taught there was in 1997. And so 1997 until 2023, right? So that was what, 26 years teaching there. And then, most of them full time teaching, and then all of a sudden they don't renew my contract. I'm going to hold off on some of the details only because, uh, you know, arbitration is coming up. Anyway, originally was set in March, then it was pushed back to May, and then it was pushed back again to July. And then they have 2 months to decide on the outcome. Some people are saying that it'll go my way. Other people say, but you never know. So we'll see about that. I doubt very much that I'll be coming back to Temple. It just simply is not in the cards. I'm sure you've been listening to the news. Universities are closing all over the place. And the ones that aren't closing are letting go a lot of their faculty. And I think I discussed this in class back in the day where, I saw this coming because the content of the general studies, right, the core classes that everyone is required to take, they weren't teaching anything useful. They were teaching, political propaganda. And no one wants that, especially when they disagree with most of it. I had so many students come to me say that they just want to get through, get their degree. And so they didn't, raise a stink. They didn't, object. They just, threw back at the teacher what they wanted to hear. And then that was it. And so, yeah, clearly it was a unsustainable way of education, which is why I didn't teach that way. Anyway, so I'll probably be teaching at the middle school level till the day I die now. So anyway, there's that. So I was talking with my kids. So now we're on to that's the update. And so now we're on to topics. So over the summer, I'm hoping to go back to a more frequent non-sermon related podcasting, much shorter. In the same way I try to keep my sermon episodes to close to 20 minutes. I'm going to try to do that with these episodes as well. Okay. So I was talking the other day to with my kid, and just recently, some superior court vacated. In other words, they basically rendered moot a regulation regarding pistol braces. Okay, and if you know nothing about firearms, then it doesn't really matter. But there was a way to make a pistol more stable for people, so it's easier to shoot. And so I was talking with my kid, and he was like, "Well, I don't get it. Why did they make it in the first place?" And I said, "Well, it's a loophole, right? So you had the TFA. I'm not going to say the right way, because they have all those listening algorithms anyway. So the TFA wrote this regulation which banned certain things on firearms, and so people still want the firearms. And so what they did was they came up with ways to get around the regulation so they can still continue to do what they wanted to do. And basically, the whole thing about pistol braces was this whole idea of short barreled rifles. Okay, so we won't get into that. But if there was no regulation to begin with, then there would be no loopholes. Okay. And so I got into this discussion about regulations and loopholes, which came first. And also there was the bump stock ban, which was ridiculous in the first place, and then to have it banned and then brought back is just kind of absurd, that whole discussion as well. So there are two kinds of regulations, broadly speaking. I'm sure there are more, but broadly speaking, there are two kinds of regulations. There are the formal and informal. So formal regulations are the regulations made by the government or the state. The informal ones basically come from common practice, the so-called the way things are done, conventional wisdom, or even culture, which is long-term habits and common practice. So let's talk about informal regulations first. So let's just say everyone is doing something in a certain way. Eventually, people get bored. And so someone who's brave enough to go against the norm, they change things up. They do something different. And it is usually extremely controversial. I've done it myself, and that's why people have called me all kinds of nasty things. For example, servant of Satan. So I was working in the church, and I, performed some rap songs, and this was back in the '90s, and it was devil music, and so people called me the servant of Satan. It was one day I'll tell you the full story, but anyway, the whole city was just going nuts because of me. But anyway, so the first time anyone does something, it just gets kind of crazy. But you don't like what's being done, and so you want to do something different. They do this in dance, they do it in music. And just thinking about music, there's a genre of music like jazz, and then there's subgenres within the genre. And so how you are going to, introduce something different, do something differently, is often controversial. It's either hit or miss, right? Either you're wildly successful because you did things in a different way, or it's so forgettable no one remembers your name, right? It's like, oh yeah, that, someone tried that, but it was dumb and no one remembers. That's out of the box kind of stuff. Remember, I always said that 99% of out of the box ideas fail and no one ever remembers them. But it's okay, because we want that 1% of ideas that totally revolutionizes everything and makes life better, right? So some ideas are hailed as groundbreaking, visionary, and all of the other ones are basically failed ideas. A good idea, but you know, was out of place. It was too late. It was the timing wasn't right, et cetera, et cetera. I go over innovation in episode 4 and 31 if you're interested. Now, formal regulations, these are basically legislation of morality. Someone says, oh, people shouldn't do that. There ought to be a law. And so they write a law. And so people who still want to do whatever activity which is now controlled and or banned, they still want to do it. And so what they have to do is come up with a creative way to get around the law, stay legal, but still have what they want, right? So drug use, if you think about it, right? So because drugs became illegal through the drug war, but people still wanted to get high, they came up with all these different ways to have their drugs But unfortunately, obviously, most of it became illegal. We saw the same thing with alcohol prohibition. People still want their booze, and so they're going to do what they can to have it. They're going to figure out a way to do it. And if the government is given enough time uh, and resources, they will criminalize a lot of ideas. But this way of trying to beat the regulations, right? So, for example, bump stocks, right? You can't have full automatic weapons, so here's a bump stock. You can't have a short barrel rifle, you have to pay extra for that, so here's a pistol brace, right? And so once you realize what the rules are, then you figure out how to get around it and you create a loophole basically. So it's not that loopholes were, you know, all were always there and they were bad. No, it's the regulation which incentivizes people to try to figure out a way around it. So it is a misallocation of creativity. In other words, all that creative energy is wasted on just simply getting around a rule. So extra time and energy is required to just simply find a loophole. All that time and energy instead could have been used to just simply improve things. Okay. So if not for regulations, people would just simply constantly innovate and improve, right? So no one would even use the word loophole, right? Um, because people would just, any improvement, any innovation would just simply be called that. It wouldn't be called a loophole. The worst kind of regulations, of course, are safety and quality standards, okay, because they are always set at the level which already exists. And so they're more protectionist than they are, improving. And I won't get into that. I've talked about protectionism before, and most of you probably already know it anyway. I do want to get to the next topic, which is war and peace. Um, I think last time I talked to you guys, Putin had already lost, so they say in the mass media, and even politicians have said Putin already lost. And this is why the United States passed a resolution to continue to fund the Ukraine war for another 10 years, right? I mean, you can see it's Afghanistan all over again. Um, I have talked a lot about peace related ideas in the sermons, but assuming that you're not really into Jesus like I am, my position is always pro peace. And if you take the position of pro peace, what that means is you don't fund wars, you let the people who are having their argument figure it out, right? And if you do that, then there'll be less killing, the fighting will end much, much sooner, right? And you would have less hate, you would have less scarring, right? So I mean, think about it, the more that the war drags on, more people get killed, more people get hurt, which means that people are going to be very angry for a much longer period of time. When Ukraine was about to sign a peace treaty with Russia, what, 2 3 years ago, the West, including NATO, they said no, 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 you can't have peace, we got to have war with Russia. And 600,000 dead Ukrainians later, we still have war, right? I mean, think about it, right? If they never had the war, you wouldn't have all these people dead, not just Ukrainians but also Russians. You wouldn't have all this waste of resources, especially money that is from here. So our taxes go up so that we can fund corrupt politicians over there, right? I mean, all this money being sent over there, it's not for defense. It's not for, they're for bribes, right? And so all the higher level politicians are taking their cut and they're running away, right? I told you that joke. An Egyptian student told me once, right? The American president was visiting Egypt. He saw a homeless person, gave $1,000 to the Egyptian president and said, and asked him to give it to the homeless person and say, the president of the United States said, God bless you. And the president of the Egypt looks at his assistant, gives him $500 and says, hey, give this to the homeless guy and tell him the president of the United States said, God bless you. He looks at his assistant, gives him $250, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually someone goes to the homeless guy and says, hey, the president of the United States said, God bless you, right? And so none of the money goes where it's supposed to. It just simply siphoned off to corrupt politicians. Now, the convenient thing about this is that if America was no longer allowed to illegally send money to these other countries, right? Because I believe it is against the Constitution to do so. They came up with all these other exceptions where they can do this kind of thing. But if they didn't have the money, then they would sue for peace, right? They would have to bring an end to all the fighting because it's so expensive, right? And by being pro peace, I don't have to pick a side. I'm sure everyone has a side that they favor, whatever. But the problem with that is you create a racialization. All the Russians, all the Ukrainians, but they're not all the same, right? You have bad people on both sides, you have good people on both sides. And so engaging in that kind of racialization, categorization, or generalization, you are engaging in reductionism, right? You are ignoring all of the exceptions just so that you can have a defensible position. That's hypocritical, right? And so by being pro peace, I avoid all the accusations of hypocrisy and also the accusations of being a baby killer. And there are a lot of babies being killed right now, no matter where you go. And I don't want to be a part of that, right? No way. So if we stay out of it, they have to figure it out. Peace comes around much quicker. Fewer people are dead, less hate, less violence. The military industrial complex here in the United States also shrinks tremendously. George Washington himself said, do not have entangling alliances. And I went over this in history class. And it's because people will be tempted, right, to start a war because they have the backing of a strong military government, right, like the United States. Um, so now that the United States is doing that, and Ukraine is losing badly, I mean, they're just getting spanked all over the place. Now we're talking about draft again here in the United States, right? So all of this pro-war stuff going on here in the United States, which is basically propaganda to fund military contractors, right, is now leading to talk of the draft. And if you do a Google search, you'll see that women also are now automatically registered for the draft as well. And this is very bad, right? Should feminists be happy that they're being treated equally, or is something else afoot, right? Obviously, it's not about peace. Peace is not what this is all about. It's about making lots of money, regardless of who is killed, regardless of how much hate, destruction is created. So, so you have that kind of position. If you take a problematic position, it always takes you to another problematic, even worse problematic position, right? So choosing a side, saying, oh, we have to support this side, is now going to mean the draft. And for a fact that all those people who were pro-war will probably not have to send their children to die for corrupt politicians, right? But I have 3 kids who are eligible for the draft right now. And I'll probably have to send them. And I am opposed to all of this. It's disgusting, how life is just, is not regarded as valuable by any of these um, people making decisions for the rest of us, right? So a couple of places where you might want to go for your sources for information, at least the ones that I use, in addition to their Twitter handles on X now, right? There's independent.org. There's Mises.org, Mises.org. There's fee.org, fee.org. Reason.com, it used to be a lot better than it is now, but I think they've sort of dropped the ball in a lot of that. In other words, they're getting weirdly politicized, but they every once in a while they have a couple good articles. Reason, Reason, reason.com. Also, if you want to do a search without a lot of the algorithm things intervening, then you can have presearch.com, presearch, presearch.com. All right. And that's it for this episode. And I'll try to make a few more this week. So hopefully you'll get back in the rhythm of listening to some of my thoughts, and take care until next time.